Maline Smith, Glasgow, 1857. In most criminal trials, the jury has only two choices, guilty or not guilty. But in Scotland, there is a third option called not proven. This verdict is unusual because it has no exact definition. In practice, it works the same way as not guilty. The person goes free and is not punished. The history of not proven goes back to the 1600s, but it is still debated to this day. One of the most famous cases where not proven was used is the trial of Maline Smith. She was a young woman from a rich family in Glasgow. Her case involved love, betrayal, and death, and people are still fascinated by it. On March 23, 1857, a young man named Pierre Emile, known as Emile, returned to his lodging house in pain. By morning, he was dead. Doctors later found a lethal dose of arsenic in his stomach. In his pocket, police found a letter from Maline Smith asking him to meet her. Very soon, suspicion fell on her. Maline was the daughter of a well-known architect. She lived a privileged life, attending parties and studying at a fine school. She carried herself with all the grace expected of an upper-class young lady. Yet behind closed doors, she had been in a relationship with Emile for 2 years. Emile was from a much lower class. He worked with plants and seeds, far below her social level. Her parents' harsh disapproval of him only seemed to make Maline want him more. The affair was dangerous for her. In Victorian society, a woman of her class could not be involved with a man before marriage. If their secret ever became public, her life would be destroyed. She burned many of Emile's love letters to hide their relationship, but he didn't do the same. At one point, Maline seemed ready to marry Emile, but her family never would have allowed it. Soon another man appeared, a wealthy merchant named William Minnock. Madeline's father approved of him, and by January 1857, Maline accepted William's proposal. This left Emile heartbroken. He still loved her, but she wanted to end their secret affair. She asked him to return her letters, fearing her family would discover them. Emile refused and even threatened to show them to her parents. This pushed Maline into despair. Then, in February and March of 1857, Maline bought arsenic several times from a local chemist. She said it was for her skin care, but Emile suffered severe stomach pain soon after her purchases. On March 23rd, after receiving a letter from her, he suddenly died of arsenic poisoning. Maline was arrested and charged with murder. Her trial began in June 1857 in Edinburgh and quickly became a sensation. Crowds gathered daily, and newspapers printed her private love letters. These letters shocked the public because they revealed physical passion in secret meetings, things that were considered scandalous at the time. The prosecution argued that Maline had both the motive and the means to kill Emile. She wanted to silence him before he ruined her engagement to William, and she had clearly bought arsenic. The defense argued that Emile might have poisoned himself, either to hurt her reputation or out of despair. They also pointed out that arsenic was sometimes used for cosmetic purposes. In the end, the jury did not fully believe either side. After only 30 minutes, they returned the verdict, not proven. This meant Maline was free, but not truly declared innocent. Maline never escaped the shadow of the case. She left Scotland, later married, and had children, but eventually separated from her husband. Later in life, her whereabouts became a mystery. Some believe she went to America, but no one knows for sure when or where she died. To this day, people argue over whether Maline murdered Emile or if he poisoned himself. What is certain is that the not proven verdict left the truth forever unclear. Road Hill House Murder, 1860s. A woman named Ruth Emily Kay lived a very long life that, from the outside, looked full and meaningful. She worked for many years as a nurse in Australia, where people admired her kindness and care for patients. On February 5, 1944, Ruth turned 100 years old. She was celebrated with a telegram from the Governor General, flowers from the local council, and champagne from her friends. Just 2 months later, she died peacefully at a home for the elderly in Strathfield. But the truth about Ruth only came out many years after her death. Her real name was Constance Kent. and she had a dark past in England. The Kent family lived in a large 3-story house called Road Hill House in the small village of Road, Somerset. The father, Samuel Saville Kent, was a factory inspector. He married Mary Ann Windus in 1829, and they had 10 children together. Sadly, most of the children died young, leaving only 4 alive by the year 1860: William, Mary, Elizabeth, and Constance. Mary Ann became weak and often ill after so many pregnancies, so Samuel hired a governess, Mary Drew Pratt, to help. In 1852, Mary Ann died, and the next year Samuel married the governess. This marriage caused talk and gossip in the village. By 1860, the new Mrs. Kent had 3 children of her own, and was pregnant with a 4th. The house was crowded with Samuel, Mary, their children, and several servants. But the family seemed calm and peaceful, spending evenings in prayer before bed. On the night of June 29, 1860, everything seemed normal. By late evening, the house was locked up, and everyone went to sleep. At 5 a.m. on June 30th, nursemaid Elizabeth woke up and checked on the children. Baby Eveline was sleeping, but 3-year-old Francis was missing from his cot. At first, Elizabeth thought Mrs. Kent had taken him during the night, so she went back to sleep. Later, when she asked, Mrs. Kent said she had not. A search of the house began, but Francis was nowhere to be found. The family then called for police and neighbors to help. Soon, 2 villagers looked inside the servants' outdoor toilet. There, on a wooden board, they found the body of Francis, covered in blood and with his throat cut. At first, suspicion fell on nursemaid Elizabeth, since she had slept in the same room as the child. Rumors spread that she had a secret lover and that Francis saw them together, so she killed him. But there was no proof, and she was soon released. The case shocked the whole country. Eventually, the famous detective Jonathan Jack Witcher was sent to investigate. He believed the killer was someone inside the house. His attention turned to 16-year-old Constance Kent. She was known to be stubborn and unhappy under her stepmother's rule. She and her brother William had even run away once, trying to go to sea. Witcher thought Constance was jealous of her young stepbrother Francis. Suspiciously, one of her nightgowns was missing after the murder, but no solid evidence was found, and she was released. The crime went unsolved, though many believed Constance was guilty. Years later, Constance was working at a home for women in Brighton. In confession to a priest, she admitted she had killed Francis. On April 25, 1865, at age 21, she went to court and confessed in writing that she alone had murdered her stepbrother. She was sentenced to death, but Queen Victoria changed it to life in prison because of her age at the time of the crime. Constance spent 20 years in jail before being released. After prison, she changed her name to Ruth Emily Kay and moved to Australia. There she lived quietly as a nurse, caring for people until her death at age 100. But questions remain. Some think Constance confessed to protect her brother William. Others believe her father Samuel may have been involved. Over 160 years later, the murder at Road Hill House is still remembered, and the mystery still lingers. Frederick Bailey Deeming, 1870s. The mystery of Jack the Ripper is still one of the most famous cases in true crime. In just over 2 months during 1888, 5 women were brutally murdered in the Whitechapel district of London. Since then, many people have argued about who Jack the Ripper really was and whether he killed more than those 5 women. Over the years, many suspects have been suggested, including Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria, an American doctor named Francis Tumblety, and even an artist named Walter Sickert. But one of the lesser-known suspects was Frederick Bailey Deeming, a criminal from England who later moved to Australia. Deeming's name became known to the world in 1892. Police in Melbourne went to check a house because of a terrible smell. Inside, they found the body of a woman named Emily Mather. She had been killed violently and hidden under the floor. The man who had rented the house used a false name, but soon police discovered his real identity, Frederick Deeming. Deeming was already known as a liar, a thief, and a dangerous man. Born in England in 1853, he was called Mad Fred as a child because of his bad behavior. He ran away from home at 16 and started a life at sea. Over time, he became skilled at scams and stealing. He married his first wife, Marie James, in 1881, and they had 4 children, but their life with him was not safe. By 1891, Deeming had killed Marie and all 4 of their children in England. Their bodies were buried under the floor of a house he rented. Neighbors had seen the family there, but Deeming told people they had left. The truth was only discovered after he was arrested in Australia for Emily Mather's murder. Deeming lived many different lives under false names. He often pretended to be a rich man or someone important. He tricked women into marrying him, then either robbed them or killed them. After Emily Mather's death, he was already planning to marry another woman, Kate Rell, by lying to her about his wealth. Luckily, Kate read about his crimes in the newspaper before she joined him, and she helped the police find him. When the police searched deeper into his past, they found his wife Marie and their children under the floor in Rainhill, England. This discovery shocked people in both England and Australia. Crowds gathered whenever Deeming was moved by police, shouting at him and wanting to see the monster who had killed his whole family. In court, Deeming's lawyers tried to say he was insane. He even claimed that the ghost of his mother told him to kill. But doctors who examined him said he was not insane, only cruel. He gave a long, strange speech during his trial, but it did not help him. The jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to death. On May 23, 1892, Deeming was hanged in Melbourne. Reports say about 12,000 people came to watch or celebrate his death. Because of the way he killed his victims, by cutting their throats, some people believed he might have been Jack the Ripper. At the time of the 1888 Whitechapel murders, Deeming's exact location was unclear, and some thought he could have been in London. He also once told a doctor that he hated women in London because he believed they had given him a disease, which sounded similar to the Ripper's hatred of women. A young woman in London even said she remembered him as a man with a large mustache who was very interested in the Ripper murders. Still, most experts today do not think Deeming was Jack the Ripper. Records suggest he may have been in Africa during those murders. Even so, some writers and researchers still believe he could be a possible suspect. The Servant Girl Annihilator, Austin, Texas, 1884. In the late 1800s, the city of Austin, Texas was growing fast. It had new businesses, a university, and even a new state capitol building that was one of the largest in the world at the time. People thought the future of the city looked bright. But in 1884, Austin became the center of a terrifying mystery. That year, a series of murders began. The victims were mostly servant girls who worked in people's homes. Because of this, the killer came to be known as the Servant Girl Annihilator. Newspapers also called him the Intangible Menace, because he would strike at night and then vanish without a trace. The first known victim was Maline Smith, attacked on December 30th, 1884. She was killed in a brutal way, and her boyfriend, Walter Spencer, was injured during the attack. Police looked into Walter, but people who knew him said he was a kind and careful man. The investigation went nowhere, and the murder shocked the whole city. In the following months, other servant girls reported strange things. Rocks were thrown at their windows, doors were rattled at night, and some women were grabbed or hit by a shadowy figure. Many were too scared to stay in their jobs, and some left Austin altogether. By March 1885, the attacks grew more violent. 2 young Swedish women, Clara Strand and Christine Martinson, were badly injured after being shot at through a window. In May, Eliza Shelley was murdered in her home while her children slept nearby. Soon after, Irene Cross was found with terrible injuries in her backyard. She lived for a short while, but died without being able to say who attacked her. As the killings continued, the city became more divided. Many white residents blamed black men for the crimes, and hundreds of suspects were arrested. Detectives from big agencies like the Pinkerton Company were even hired, but no one could be proven guilty. In fact, more than 400 people were investigated, but the murders kept happening. The fear only grew when children became victims too. In August 1885, 11-year-old Mary Ramey was killed, along with other women like Gracie Vance. The crimes were all brutal and often involved strange wounds. One clue was a set of unusual footprints found near some of the crime scenes. On Christmas Eve 1885, the killer changed his pattern by targeting two white women, Susan Hancock and Eula Phillips, in separate attacks on the same night. Their murders shocked the entire city and made national headlines. Newspapers across America wrote about Austin's mysterious killer, calling him one of the most terrifying criminals in history. Eula Phillips' husband, James, was put on trial, accused of killing his wife. The case became a scandal, especially when it was revealed that Eula may have been meeting other men in secret. James was first found guilty, but the verdict was later overturned. In the end, there was no proof against him, and he was released. And then, just as suddenly as they had started, the murders stopped. No one was ever caught or punished for the crimes. A few years later, in 1888, London was shaken by the famous murders of Jack the Ripper. Newspapers in Texas suggested that the servant girl annihilator might have gone overseas and become Jack the Ripper. Some modern writers and historians also believe the two killers could have been the same person. Over time, theories about the Austin killer have included a local cook with a clubfoot, the son-in-law of a doctor who ran the Texas asylum, or even a traveler from England. But none of these were ever proven. Today, the servant girl annihilator is remembered as one of the first recorded serial killers in the United States. Just like Jack the Ripper, his true identity remains a mystery. Henri Désiré Landru, 1890s. You have probably never seen or answered a personal ad, but these ads have been around for centuries, long before dating apps existed. It was easy to lie in these ads and pretend to be someone else. This is exactly how Henri Désiré Landru, a French serial killer, found his victims. From 1914 to 1919, he lured women through personal ads and killed them. In the end, he became known as Bluebeard, after a cruel character in an old story. The story begins in April 1914, in Paris. Henri Landru, then 45 years old, placed an ad in the paper using a fake name. He was not looking for love, he was looking for women with money. A woman named Jeanne Couchet answered the ad. She was 39 years old and owned a shop. She also had a 15-year-old son, André. Landru came across as polite, charming, and well-mannered. He quickly gained her trust, and soon Jeanne and her son moved with him to a villa in Vernouillet. Jean helped him furnish the villa, and he promised to marry her. What she did not know was that Landru was already married and had a long history of tricking people out of money. He had even gone to prison for fraud before, but his greed did not stop. On January 4th, 1915, Jane and her son disappeared and were never seen again. Unlike many killers, Landru's childhood was not filled with abuse or trauma. He was born in Paris on April 12, 1869. His mother worked in laundry, and his father was a fireman at an ironworks factory. He went to Catholic school and graduated as a teenager. At 18, he joined the military and rose to the rank of sergeant. In 1891, he began a relationship with his cousin, who gave birth to his daughter. 2 years later, he married another woman and had 4 children with her. Although he was short, bald, and not very attractive, Landru had many lovers. People who knew him said he had a very strong libido. After Jeanne Couchet vanished, Landru moved to a house in Gambais. He lived a secretive life, continuing to place ads to meet women. More women came to see him, but none were ever seen leaving his house. Neighbors sometimes saw foul-smelling smoke rise from his chimney, and they complained about it. During this time, World War I was happening. Many women were lonely because their husbands were away or had died in the war. Landru used this to his advantage. Between 1914 and 1919, he killed at least 10 women and Jean's teenage son. He cut up their bodies and burned them in his oven. He also kept their belongings in his basement, along with detailed notes. He had a list of every woman he scammed or killed, and records of which fake name he used with each one. In total, he had been in contact with around 300 women. His only motive was money. Once he got it, he got rid of the women. Police began looking into him after a relative of one missing woman raised questions. When investigators searched his house, they found his secret notes and realized that each name on the list matched a missing person. They also looked inside his oven after hearing the neighbors' complaints and found hundreds of burned bone fragments and teeth. Landru was arrested and put on trial in 1921. His lawyers argued that no complete bodies were ever found and that the bone fragments could have come from animals. On November 29, 1921, he was found guilty of 11 murders. On February 25, 1922, he was executed by guillotine. Until the very end, Landru never admitted to his crimes. Rose Harsent, Suffolk, England, 1902. In the small village of Peasenhall in Suffolk, England, a shocking murder took place in 1902. The victim was a young maid named Rose Annie Harsent, only 22 years old. Her death became known as the Peasenhall Mystery, and more than a century later, it still remains unsolved. Rose was born in March 1879 in Peasenhall. She was described as lively, kind, and attractive. She had a brother named Harry and was active in the Methodist Church, where she sang in the choir. By 1902, Rose was working at Providence House, a large country home owned by a tailor and church elder named William Crisp. She lived in the attic room of the house, which looked out over the nearby homes and inns. Across the way lived William Gardner, a 35-year-old man who worked at Smith & Sons, a local factory. Gardner was married, had 6 children, and was also a respected church elder. He too was active in the choir, where Rose sang. On the night of May 31, 1902, a violent thunderstorm swept across the village. At the same time, Rose received a letter. It told her to light a candle in her window at 10 p.m. as a signal, and then to meet the sender at midnight by the back door. Rose followed the instructions, but instead of a secret meeting, she was attacked. The next morning, Rose's father arrived to drop off some laundry. When he entered the kitchen, he found a horrifying sight. His daughter was lying at the bottom of the stairs in a pool of blood. At first, it looked like she had fallen, and her lamp had set her dress on fire. But it soon became clear this was no accident. Rose's face was badly bruised, a deep transverse laceration across the anterior neck, and multiple penetrating injuries to the thoracic region. There were burns on her body, and a bottle of paraffin, lamp oil, was nearby. It looked like someone had tried to set her body on fire to cover up the crime. The truth about Rose also came out in the autopsy. She was 6 months pregnant, and nobody knew for certain who the father was, but many suspected William Gardner. Witnesses had seen the two of them together in secret before, and some even claimed to have overheard them in the church chapel. Rumors spread quickly in the small village. The police gathered evidence, much of it pointing toward Gardner. The mysterious letter seemed to match his handwriting, and the envelope looked like one from his workplace. Neighbors saw him outside his house at 10 p.m., the same time Rose lit her candle. Muddy footprints leading from Providence House to Gardner's home also raised suspicion. A knife belonging to him was found with traces of blood, though it couldn't be proven to be human. Gardner denied everything. He said he never had an affair with Rose, wasn't the father of her baby, and wasn't there that night. His wife, Georgina, swore he had been home in bed. In court, the evidence was strong but circumstantial. There were no direct witnesses and no clear proof. The jury could not agree on a verdict. In fact, Gardner was tried twice, but both times the juries failed to reach a decision. In the end, the case was dropped. Gardner moved away with his family, and he lived until 1941. Some people believed Gardner was guilty, others thought he was innocent. A few even whispered that maybe his wife, Georgina, had killed Rose out of jealousy. Rose was laid to rest on June 5, 1902, in Peasenhall Cemetery. Her grave bears the sad words, "A light is from our household gone, a voice we loved is stilled." Elsie Parubek, Chicago, 1911. Elsie Parubek was a little girl who lived in Chicago in the early 1900s. She was born in 1906 to parents František and Carolina, who had come from eastern Bohemia. At that time, Bohemia was part of the Austria-Hungary Empire, but today it is part of the Czech Republic. Even though her parents gave her a name from their homeland, everyone in America called her Elsie. Her father was known as Frank, and he worked as a painter. Her mother stayed at home to take care of their big family. Life for Czech immigrants in Chicago was not always easy, but they built close communities where they could speak their own language and keep their traditions. Children often played outside without much supervision, and it was common for them to walk alone to visit friends or relatives. On Saturday, April 8, 1911, 5-year-old Elsie left her home on South Albany Avenue to visit her aunt, Julia Trampoda, who lived nearby. On her way, Elsie met her cousin Josie and some other children. They were watching an organ grinder play music on the street. Elsie stopped for a while to listen, but when the organ grinder moved on and the children followed, she decided not to go with them. That was the last time Elsie was seen by her family. Hours passed, and when Elsie did not arrive at her aunt's house, her mother became worried. At first, she thought Elsie might have gone to a friend's house and fallen asleep. But when night came and Elsie was still missing, her father rushed to the police station. At first, the police did not take the case very seriously and suggested Elsie had just stayed somewhere overnight. But by the next morning, it was clear something was wrong. Police Captain John McWeeny then took charge and began a serious search. News spread quickly, and soon many people were helping to look for Elsie. A girl claimed she had seen a wagon with Romany people in it, and inside was a girl who looked like Elsie. Police began to suspect that she had been kidnapped by someone from that community to work as a beggar. This theory was strengthened by a past case of another young girl who had once gone missing in a similar way. Elsie's father even offered his life savings, $50, as a reward for her safe return. Police searched canals, streets, and neighborhoods. They followed many leads, but nothing worked out. Rumors spread that she had been seen with the organ grinder or in different wagons, but none of these claims led to her. For weeks, the family lived in fear and hope. Newspaper articles shared Elsie's picture and described her blue eyes, blonde hair, and red dress. Thousands of people in Chicago prayed she would be found. Sadly, on May 9, 1911, about a month after she vanished, her body was found in the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal near Lockport, about 35 miles outside the city. The discovery devastated her parents. At first, her father could not even recognize her because the body had been in the water for some time. But her mother confirmed it was her daughter. Doctors examined the body and found she had not drowned, meaning she had been killed before being placed in the water. Some believed she had been suffocated. Her funeral was held on May 12th, and nearly 3,000 people came to mourn. The Czech community and the whole city grieved for her. Police investigated many suspects, including a strange local man and others, but no one was ever proven guilty. Newspapers called it one of the biggest searches for a missing child the city had ever seen. Even today, her story is remembered as a sad and mysterious crime that was never fully solved. The Lava Lake Murders, 1924, Oregon, USA. In the spring of 1924, as the snow melted around Little Lava Lake near Bend, Oregon, a dark secret was uncovered. Beneath the frozen surface of the lake were the bodies of 3 missing fur trappers. Their deaths remain one of Oregon's most puzzling, unsolved mysteries, nearly a century later. The story began in late 1923. 3 men from Bend decided to spend the winter trapping furs in the Deschutes National Forest. Their names were Edward Ed Nichols, aged 50, Roy Wilson, aged 35, and Edward Morris, the youngest at 25. Nichols worked as a caretaker for a cabin and looked after foxes kept there, while Wilson and Morris were loggers who trapped furs on the side. The cabin they used belonged to a local contractor, Edward Logan. Instead of paying rent, the 3 men agreed to care for Logan's 6 foxes. By December, they had already gathered many valuable furs. Nichols returned to Bend before Christmas to sell them and was said to be in good spirits. He later went back to the cabin, and that was the last time most people in town saw him. On January 15, 1924, a man named Alan Wilcoxon visited the cabin on his way to Elk Lake. He spent the night with the trappers and later said that they seemed happy and healthy. No one knew at the time that he would be the last person to see them alive. When weeks passed with no word from the men, their families grew worried. By spring, searchers went out into the forest. What they found was strange and troubling. The cabin was empty, with food burned in pots and breakfast dishes still set on the table. Traps were left unattended, animals had died in them, and the foxes were gone. A hungry cat was found inside, clearly not fed for months. Even more chilling, a blood-stained hammer was discovered near the fox pen. The men's sled was later found abandoned with bloodstains on it. Tracks led across the frozen lake, where a hole had been cut into the ice. Bits of hair, blood, and even a tooth were discovered nearby. It became clear that something terrible had happened. In April, when the lake ice began to melt, searchers found the bodies. Nichols, Wilson, and Morris were floating in the water, wrapped in cloth. They had all been shot and beaten, likely with the hammer found earlier. Their bodies had been dragged across the ice on the sled before being dropped into the lake. The police tried to piece together what happened. They believed more than one killer was involved, since Wilson had been a Marine and would have been hard to overpower alone. One suspect was a man named Charles Lee Kimsey, who had argued with Nichols in the past. Kimsey was skilled with weapons and had a criminal record for robbery and attempted murder. Suspicion grew when it was discovered that, shortly after the trappers disappeared, a man sold furs in Portland under Nichols's trapping license. Witnesses thought this man could have been Kimsey. For years, he was hunted by the law and was eventually caught in 1933, but denied killing the trappers. He claimed he had been working in Colorado at the time, and his employer supported this. Kimsey was never charged with the Lava Lake murders, though he did go to prison for other crimes. Other names came up, including a school teacher linked to suspicious deaths, but no solid evidence was ever found. To this day, no one knows for certain who killed the three men or why. Margaret Martin, Pennsylvania, 1938. Margaret Martin was a 19-year-old student from Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. She was a quiet and shy girl, but also very hardworking and serious about her goals. She had many friends and was known as a kind young woman. Margaret graduated from Kingston High School in 1937 and later joined Wilkes-Barre Business College to learn secretarial skills. She studied very hard and even graduated with honors. Just 17 days after finishing business college, something tragic happened. On Saturday, December 17, 1938, Margaret received a phone call. The caller was a man she did not know. He told her that he was from out of town and was setting up an insurance company. He said he needed secretaries and that he had gotten her name from her college. Margaret was very happy to hear this because she had just graduated and wanted to start working. She agreed to meet the man at Kingston Corners, a spot close to her home. She told her mom she would be right back before leaving. Sadly, that was the last time her family saw her alive. A witness later reported that he saw a young woman who looked like Margaret getting into a brown Plymouth or a black sedan. The driver was described as a man in his late 20s, slightly overweight, with sandy-colored hair. This was likely the man who had called her. When Margaret did not return home, her parents grew very worried. She was a girl who always valued time and would never leave her family waiting without a reason. They quickly informed the police that something was wrong. Unfortunately, there was a newspaper strike going on at the time, so her disappearance was not widely shared in the news. Many people in the community did not even know that Margaret was missing. 4 days later, on December 21, 1938, a young muskrat hunter named Anthony Rozakowski made a terrible discovery. While setting traps near Keelersburg Creek in Wyoming County, he noticed a burlap sack floating in the water. Inside was Margaret's body. Her mother was the one who had to identify her, which was heartbreaking. The condition of Margaret's body showed she had suffered greatly. She had deep cuts on her body, signs of assault, and had been strangled to death. Police quickly launched a huge search. Dozens of state troopers searched the area, and at first they were hopeful they would find the killer. But no strong evidence was discovered. A short time later, investigators found burned clothing in an abandoned sawmill about 15 miles away. The clothes matched what Margaret had been wearing the day she disappeared. Footprints outside suggested she had been brought there by force. Police believed this might have been the place where she was killed. On December 24th, the day before Christmas, while most families were celebrating, Margaret's family was forced to bury her. Over 1,000 people attended her funeral, but her parents were so broken that they spent the service scanning the crowd, wondering if her killer was standing among them. Years passed, and police continued to search, but no one was ever charged. At one point, a young man even confessed, but it turned out he was lying, and the case went cold. Some investigators believed her killer might have been a local man who knew the sawmill and the remote area. Others thought it could have been a traveling serial killer. Around that time, other young women in Pennsylvania were also attacked and murdered in similar ways, but no one was ever caught. To this day, Margaret's killer has never been identified. Evelyn Dick, Canada, 1946. Evelyn Dick was born on October 13, 1920, in Beamsville, Canada. Her parents, Donald and Alexandra McLean, had moved to Canada from Scotland hoping for better work opportunities. Soon after Evelyn was born, her father got a job as a conductor for the Hamilton Street Railway, so the family moved to Hamilton and lived at 214 Rosslyn Avenue. Evelyn's childhood was not very happy. Her parents argued a lot. Her father often drank, and her mother was strict and wanted to climb the social ladder. They were very protective of Evelyn, their only child. They did not let her play with neighborhood kids, insisting instead that she mix with children from wealthier families. Her father's job did not pay much, so it was a surprise when Evelyn was moved from a public school to the expensive Loretto Academy. People in town began to gossip. Some believed that her father was stealing money from the railway to pay for their lifestyle. As Evelyn grew older, she became very attractive and drew attention from many men. Her mother pushed her to marry someone rich so she could live comfortably. Evelyn went to parties and mingled with people in high society, but she was never fully accepted. Instead, she spent much of her time with older men. In 1941, Evelyn became pregnant. In 1942, she gave birth to a daughter, Heather. To avoid gossip about being unmarried, she told people she had a husband who was away fighting in the war. Her mother mostly raised Heather, while Evelyn continued her social life. In 1944, Evelyn had another baby, a boy named Peter. But when she came home from the hospital, the baby was not with her. She told neighbors she had given him up for adoption. Her parents' marriage eventually ended. Evelyn moved into an apartment with her mother and daughter. In 1945, Evelyn met John Dick, a Russian-born man 15 years older than her. He was a streetcar driver and treated Heather kindly. She told him she was a widow, and he quickly fell in love with her. Within weeks, they married on October 4, 1945. Evelyn believed he was wealthy, but after the marriage, she realized he was not. The marriage was troubled. Evelyn continued to see other men, and John eventually moved out to stay with his cousin. He later threatened to expose Evelyn's father's thefts unless he helped him save the marriage. Donald was furious and even threatened to kill John. On March 6, 1946, John Dick disappeared. 10 days later, children playing near Hamilton's escarpment found a human torso. It was confirmed to be John. Police questioned Evelyn. She gave several strange stories, including one about a mysterious Italian man, and another about her friend Bill Bohozik being involved. Bloodstains matching John's type were found in a car she borrowed, and in her home, police discovered blood-stained shoes, a pipe with bullet holes, and most shocking of all, a suitcase in the attic containing the body of a baby boy set in concrete. This was believed to be Evelyn's son Peter, the child she claimed she had given up for adoption. Evelyn, her father Donald, and her friend Bill were charged with John's murder. Evelyn's first trial in 1946 drew huge media attention. She was found guilty of murder and sentenced to hang, but her lawyers appealed, and in 1947 her conviction was overturned. Instead, she was found guilty of manslaughter in the death of her son Peter and sentenced to life in prison. In 1958, after serving 11 years, Evelyn was granted parole. She disappeared from public life under a new identity. In 1985, she was given a pardon, but no one knows for sure what became of her. Some believe she remarried and had another child. Anne Noblet, The Deep Freeze Murder, England, 1957. The case became known in the media as the Deep Freeze Murder. The victim was a young woman named Anne Noblet, and her tragic death remains unsolved even today. Because there was no DNA testing at the time, police had a very hard time solving the case. On December 30th, 1957, Anne attended a holiday party with friends. She was in good spirits, and everything seemed normal throughout the evening. Later that night, she decided to take the bus home. Around 6 p.m., she was last seen by a friend named Shirley Edwards, who watched her get onto the bus. Nothing seemed unusual, except for one strange detail. Shirley noticed a car parked nearby with its rear lights glowing in the dark. That car disappeared shortly after. When Anne failed to come home, her parents quickly grew worried. They did not wait long before calling the police. A search party was formed, and even dogs were brought in to try to track her. Despite all their efforts, there was no sign of Anne. For a whole month, her family lived in fear and confusion. On January 31st, 1958, their worst fears were confirmed. 2 men walking their dog in Rose Grove Woods came across Anne's body. She was found about 7 miles from where she was last seen. Her remains were fully clothed, and some of her personal belongings were nearby. Sadly, it was clear she had been strangled and assaulted. At first, police thought she had simply frozen due to the harsh winter weather. But further investigation revealed something far more disturbing. Anne's body had been refrigerated before being left in the woods. Experts realized that she had been stored in some kind of cold unit, such as a freezer or industrial refrigerator, for over a month. This fact shocked investigators and gave the case its deep freeze murder name. There were more troubling details. Her last meal was still undigested in her stomach, meaning she had been killed very soon after being taken on December 30th. Police concluded that she must have been picked up between the bus stop and her home, possibly by someone she knew, since she might have entered the vehicle willingly. Investigators searched every possible location within a 30-mile radius where a freezer could have been kept. Factories, farms, and other buildings, but they found nothing useful. The only clear detail was that her body was moved to the woods just 1 day before it was discovered. This meant her killer had kept her frozen for more than a month before finally disposing of her. Despite the efforts of detectives, no strong leads ever came to light. The killer was never identified, and the crime remains one of the most chilling, unsolved murders in Britain. The Wanda Beach Murders, Australia, 1965. Marianne Schmidt was born on October 30th, 1950, in West Germany. Her parents were Helmut and Elizabeth Schmidt. She grew up with 5 siblings: Helmut Jr., Hans, Peter, Trixie, and Wolfgang. Later, when the family moved to Australia, another brother, Norbert, was born. When the Schmidts arrived in New South Wales, they first stayed in a migrant hostel before settling in a small town called Temora. In 1963, Helmut Sr. became sick with Hodgkin's disease, so the family moved to Sydney so he could get proper medical care. Sadly, in June 1964, he passed away, leaving Elizabeth with 7 children to raise alone. The Schmidts' neighbors in Sydney were Jim and Jeanette Teague. Living with them was their granddaughter, Christine Sherrick, who was the same age as Marianne. Christine's father had died years earlier, and although her mother had remarried, she chose to live with her grandparents. Marianne and Christine quickly became best friends. In early January 1965, the 2 girls and the Schmidt children went to Cronulla Beach several times. On Monday, January 11th, Marianne and Christine, along with 4 of the younger Schmidt children, traveled by train to the beach. When they arrived, it was windy and the beach was closed, so they sat near the rocks and had a picnic. At one point, Christine wandered off alone, though nobody knew where she went. Wolfgang, Marianne's younger brother, noticed a teenage boy catching crabs nearby. He later said he saw this same boy again with Marianne and Christine. However, his story about what the boy carried, a spear gun, knife, or both, changed over time. Around 1 p.m., Marianne and Christine told the younger children they would go fetch the bags they had left near the rocks. Instead, they walked into the sand dunes. When Peter, one of the younger brothers, said they were going the wrong way, the girls laughed and kept walking. The children waited for hours, but Marianne and Christine never came back. By 5 p.m., the younger siblings returned home alone. The girls were reported missing that evening. The next day, January 12th, a man walking through the dunes with his nephews discovered a body buried in the sand. At first, he thought it was a mannequin, but soon realized it was a young woman. Police uncovered 2 bodies lying close together. They were Marianne and Christine. Both girls had sustained severe assaults. Christine suffered a cranial fracture along with multiple stab wounds. Marianne presented with a deep cervical laceration extending to near-complete transection, in addition to repeated stab injuries. Evidence suggested attempted assault in both cases. Police searched for the murder weapons but never found them. Investigators interviewed about 7,000 people, making it the biggest case in Australia at the time. Still, the crime went unsolved. Over the years, 3 main suspects were considered. Alan Bassett, a convicted killer who gave police a strange painting that some believed showed hidden clues. Christopher Wilder, who later became a serial killer in the U.S. during the 1980s. Derek Percy, who was imprisoned for murdering a young girl in 1969 and suspected in several other child killings. Despite these leads, no one was ever charged. DNA testing in later years gave police some hope, but samples were either too weak or lost. For the families, the pain never went away. Marianne's mother, Elizabeth, passed away in 2009 without ever knowing who killed her daughter. The Gitche Manitou Massacre, Iowa, 1973. On the night of November 17, 1973, 5 teenagers went to Gitche Manitou Preserve, a quiet park on the border of South Dakota and Iowa. The group included 17-year-old Roger Essam, his friend 18-year-old Stuart, Stuart's 14-year-old brother Dana, their 15-year-old friend Michael, and 13-year-old Sandra Chesky. Sandra had just started dating Roger, and the group planned to hang out, play music, and sit around a fire. They parked Stuart's van near an old stone shelter and walked closer to the river to build a fire. The boys played guitar, shared a joint, and talked while Sandra sat close to Roger. They didn't know that 3 brothers, Alan, David, and James Fryer, were also in the preserve that night. The Fryer brothers were carrying shotguns and were supposedly looking to hunt deer. Instead, they came across the teens and decided to sneak up on them. At first, the teens heard twigs snapping, but thought it was just animals. Then Roger saw someone and called out, asking who was there. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. Roger was hit and killed instantly. Panic broke out. Stuart was also shot, and Michael grabbed Sandra and told her not to run, or she would be killed too. The Fryer brothers came out of the darkness, claiming they were police officers and saying the teens were in trouble for having marijuana. Michael stepped out and asked why they were shooting if they were really cops. Alan then shot him in the shoulder. The brothers tied the teens' hands and forced them toward their truck. Sandra tried to help the injured Michael while Stuart was dragged along even though he was badly hurt. The brothers separated Sandra from the boys. Alan put her in their truck, untied her, and told her not to worry. Sandra asked about Roger, but Alan lied and said Roger had only been shot with a tranquilizer and would be fine. Sandra saw her friends being marched down the road at gunpoint. That was the last time she saw them alive. The Fryer brothers then lined the boys up near Stuart's van, shined the headlights on them, and executed them one by one. Dana, Michael, and Stuart were all killed by close-range shotgun blasts. The brothers left their bodies in the field, abandoned Stuart's van in a parking lot, and drove off with Sandra. Alan spent hours driving Sandra around. He stopped for gas, bought her a soda, and told her he was the leader of his brothers. Eventually, Alan drove her to an old farmhouse where the other two brothers were waiting. While Alan and David stepped away, James stayed with Sandra and assaulted her. Later, Alan returned and decided he would take Sandra home instead of killing her. Before dropping her off at her house around dawn, Alan warned Sandra that if she told anyone, they would only get a few years in jail and then come back to kill her. Sandra, terrified, ran into her home. The next morning, a couple test driving a car came across the bodies of the three boys lying in the preserve. Police were called, and Roger's body was later found near the campfire where he had first been shot. Sandra eventually went to the police and told them what happened. They didn't understand why she had been spared. But soon, evidence matched what she said, and the Fryer brothers were caught. Alan Fryer and James Fryer were both convicted of first-degree murder and received 5 consecutive life sentences each, with no chance of parole. Their younger brother, David Fryer, agreed to testify against them and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, for which he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. The Alton Child Murders, Illinois, 1985. Alton Coleman was born on November 6, 1955, in Waukegan, Illinois. He was the third of 5 children. His mother, who worked several jobs and also worked on the streets, did not want him. She once threw him in a trash can, but his grandmother rescued him. Alton grew up in a troubled home filled with rejection, drugs, and abuse. According to people who knew him, he was exposed to terrible things, including abuse and disturbing practices from both his mother and grandmother. He was also teased by other kids because he wet his pants often and was called names. As a young boy, Alton joined a street gang and started breaking the law. He eventually dropped out of school in the 9th grade. At just 18 years old in December 1973, he committed his first known serious crime. Along with a partner, he kidnapped a 54-year-old woman named Eleanor McIntyre at gunpoint, assaulted her, and stole her belongings. He went to prison but was released later. Over the next years, he was often arrested for different crimes, including assault, but sometimes avoided long sentences because cases were dismissed or juries did not convict him. In 1983, Alton met a woman named Deborah Brown. Deborah was born in 1962 in Waukegan. Unlike Alton, she came from a stable family and had no criminal history. At the time, she was engaged to another man, but she eventually left her fiancé and family to be with Alton. Together, they began one of the most violent crime sprees in U.S. history. In 1984, after being arrested for another assault but released before trial, Alton and Deborah began traveling from state to state. Their crimes included kidnappings, robberies, assaults, and murders. Many of their victims were women and children. One of the first victims was a 9-year-old girl named Vernita Wheat, whom Alton abducted in Wisconsin. She was later found dead. Soon after, they attacked 2 young girls in Indiana, killing one and leaving the other for dead, though she survived. In another case, they befriended a young woman named Donna Williams from church in Gary, Indiana. She later went missing, and her body was discovered weeks later. The couple moved through several states, leaving a trail of violence. They invaded homes, beat and robbed elderly couples, and killed people they had just met. In Ohio, they murdered a woman named Virginia Temple and her 10-year-old daughter, Rochelle. Evidence showed Rochelle had been assaulted. Later, they tied up and attacked more elderly victims, leaving some for dead. By July 1984, the FBI placed Alton Coleman on its 10 most wanted list. The nationwide manhunt intensified as their crimes grew more brutal. On July 19th, the body of a 79-year-old man named Eugene Scott was found in Indiana. The next day, police finally caught Alton and Deborah in Evanston, Illinois, after a citizen recognized him. They surrendered without a fight. Both were tried separately in several states. Alton Coleman received multiple death sentences for his crimes. He represented himself in court at times, even trying to blame Deborah for murders, but this failed. Deborah Brown also received death sentences, but later they were reduced to life in prison because of her mental health issues. On April 22, 2002, Alton Coleman was executed by lethal injection in Ohio. Family members of his victims attended his execution. Deborah Brown is still in prison, serving many decades behind bars. In 2005, she expressed regret and apologized to the families of the victims. The Bain Family Murders, New Zealand, 1994. In 1994, New Zealand was shocked by one of its most famous murder cases. It became known as the Bain Family Murders. Almost an entire family was killed inside their home, and only one person, David Bain, survived. The case quickly divided the nation, with some people believing David was guilty and others believing his father Robin was the true killer. The Bain family lived in Dunedin, a city in the south of New Zealand. The parents were Robin and Margaret Bain, and they had 4 children, David, Arawa, Laniet, and Stephen. At first, the family lived in Papua New Guinea, where Robin worked as a teacher. They later moved back to New Zealand in 1988. Robin and Margaret's marriage had fallen apart, and they often argued. Robin even lived in a caravan instead of the family home most of the time. The house was messy, falling apart, and unpleasant to live in. Rumors also spread that Robin may have been hurting his youngest daughter, Laniet. Margaret believed strange spiritual things too. She thought Robin was possessed by a demon and even wrote about this in her diary. The children all had different relationships with their parents. David, the oldest, was very close to his mother, but not to his father. At 22, David was studying music and wanted to be an opera singer. He also worked as a paperboy in the mornings. On June 20th, 1994, David did his usual paper round early in the morning. Around 7 a.m., he called emergency services in a panic. He told them his entire family had been killed. When police arrived, they found a shocking scene. David's mother Margaret and his sisters Arawa and Laniet were dead in their beds. His younger brother Stephen, who was only 14, had been killed in his room after a violent struggle. Finally, his father Robin was found in the lounge with a bullet wound to the head. Beside Robin's body was the family rifle, which actually belonged to David. On the family computer, someone had typed a message. "Sorry, you are the only one who deserves to stay." From the start, police had 2 main suspects, Robin or David. At first glance, it looked like Robin may have killed his family and then himself. But soon, evidence began to point at David instead. Investigators noticed that the angle of Robin's head wound made it almost impossible for him to have shot himself. His fingerprints weren't on the rifle, and there was no gunpowder on his hands. On the other hand, there were suspicious details about David. He had injuries on his body that he couldn't explain. He admitted he was the only one who knew where the key to unlock the rifle was kept. And most importantly, his timeline didn't make sense. He returned home from his paper round around 6:42 a.m., but he didn't call the police until 7:09 a.m., almost half an hour later. He said he zoned out during this time. In 1995, David Bain went to trial for the murders of his family. The prosecution argued that David killed each member of his family in the early morning, fought with Stephen, washed his bloody clothes, and then went on his paper round as if nothing had happened. They said he waited for his father to come inside and then shot him, arranging the scene to look like he did it to himself. David's defense team claimed that Robin was the true killer. They said Robin typed the note on the computer and then killed himself. In the end, David Bain was found guilty on 5 counts of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 16 years before parole. Si Sheo Fung was a teenage girl from Selangor, Malaysia. She was bright, cheerful, and full of dreams for the future. Like many girls her age, she had just finished high school and was looking forward to college or maybe working part-time. Sadly, her life was cut short before she could take her next steps. On February 26, 2004, she went out for tea with a man she knew well. He came to pick her up in a white car, and her sister saw her leaving with him. It looked like nothing unusual, just 2 people spending time together. But that evening, when she did not return home and stopped answering her phone, Her family became worried. By the next day, their concern grew. Her father went to the police and also sought help from the Malaysian Chinese Association. Soon after, the family began receiving phone calls demanding a ransom of 40,000 ringgit for her release. The callers claimed she was still alive and desperate to save his daughter. Her father dropped off the money at a location in Klang. But even after paying, she did not return home. Police worked hard to trace the ransom calls, but progress was slow. Days turned into weeks, and the family feared the worst. Finally, investigators traced the white car that had picked her up. It belonged to a 29-year-old man named Kerden Hawk. At first, he denied everything, but his younger brother later admitted that he had helped bury a body. On March 8, 2004, about 2 weeks after she went missing, police were led to a house. A foul smell was coming from the front yard. After digging for 14 hours, they found a female body buried under concrete. The victim's head was covered with a plastic bag tied with rope, and her hands were bound. Now faced with the evidence, he finally confessed. He admitted that on the night she went missing, he had asked her for intimacy while they were at a friend's house. When she refused, he attacked her, assaulted her, and then strangled her to death. He wrapped her body in plastic, hired someone to dig a pit in the yard, and poured concrete over her remains, pretending he was helping his friend lay new flooring. What made this worse was that Kerr already had a violent past. In 1999, he and others had been accused of assault, but he was still free. After being arrested for Xiao Feng's case, he later escaped police custody by climbing through a toilet ceiling. He remained on the run for 7 years, living under false names. During this time, his younger brother faced trial, but was acquitted in 2008 because of a lack of evidence. This left Xiao Feng's family heartbroken and angry at the system. They moved away to try to rebuild their lives, but they never stopped hoping for justice. In 2011, he was finally caught during an unrelated car theft investigation. His fingerprints and DNA matched the records from Xiao Feng's case. He was brought back to court, and in 2015, the full details of his crime came out. The judge ruled that the murder was deliberate and cruel, done simply because Xiao Feng had refused him. He was sentenced to death in 2015. He appealed, but in 2016 the Court of Appeal upheld the ruling. In July 2024, the federal court confirmed the death sentence once again. After 20 years, justice had finally been served. The Dirang Murder, Malaysia, 2012. On March 1, 2012, the life of a family in Johor, Malaysia, changed forever. 4-year-old Nurul Nadira Abdullah, lovingly called Dirang, was sent by her mother on a small errand to the nearby grocery shop. It was something she had done before, and the neighborhood was considered safe. But this time, she never returned. What followed was a week of fear, desperate searching, and finally a discovery that shocked the whole nation. Dirang was born in June 2007. She was a sweet and polite little girl who respected everyone, young or old. She loved her family, enjoyed school, and especially liked her religious studies. Though her parents had separated, she stayed close to both of them. She lived with her mother, Rosaline, who later remarried and gave Dirang a younger sister. Life was simple and happy until tragedy struck. On that morning in March, Rosaline sent her daughter to buy some groceries. Dirang left the house wearing her favorite pink t-shirt and blue shorts. Witnesses remembered seeing her happily walking with her pigtails bouncing. The errand should have taken only 10 to 15 minutes, but when an hour passed and she still hadn't returned, her mother grew worried. She stepped outside, called out for her daughter, and neighbors quickly joined in the search. As the hours went by, panic spread through the community. News of the missing child spread through social media and local television, and soon the police became involved. A large search operation was launched. Volunteers, neighbors, and even strangers joined in, searching every street, alley, and empty lot. A few days later, the first chilling clue was found. Her slippers and the groceries she had bought were discovered scattered in a nearby oil palm plantation, only a few hundred meters from her home. This discovery crushed hopes that she had simply wandered off. Police began questioning suspects, including neighbors and a married couple who had recently moved into the area. On March 7th, a strange phone call added another twist. A woman claimed she had kidnapped Dirang and demanded ransom money. The demand was first 30,000 ringgit, later reduced to 10,000. At first, the call gave her family a little hope that Dirang was still alive, but the truth would soon prove far worse. The next day, March 8th, her grandfather went for his usual walk near the plantation. He noticed something unusual at an abandoned housing area. What he found would haunt him forever. In a hole, there were burnt human remains. The police were called, and forensic teams quickly confirmed the worst. The remains belonged to little Dirang. The details shocked everyone. Her body had been badly burned, but investigators found clear signs of abuse and violence before her death. She had been assaulted, strangled, and then set on fire. Soon after, police arrested a 24-year-old contract worker named Muin Maiden. Evidence linked him directly to the crime. DNA tests matched him to the remains, and soil from his motorcycle matched the soil at the crime scene. Despite his denial, the evidence was overwhelming. In 2013, after a long trial, he was found guilty of kidnapping, assault, and murder. He was sentenced to death. His later appeals were all rejected. Even when Malaysia considered ending the death penalty, his crime was seen as too cruel to deserve leniency. In July 2024, his final appeal was dismissed, confirming his punishment. The murder of Abby Choi, Hong Kong, 2023. Hong Kong is often called one of the safest cities in the world. But in early 2023, the shocking murder of Abby Choi shook the whole city and made headlines around the globe. Abby Choi was only 28 years old. She was a model, influencer, and socialite who was quickly rising in the fashion world. She had appeared in big magazines such as Vogue and Harper's Bazaar, and had even been featured on the cover of the official Monaco. Many saw her as a style icon with a very bright future. Abby's personal life, however, was not as glamorous. She married her ex-husband, Alex Kwong, when she was just 18. The couple had 2 children together, now aged 8 and 10. After their divorce, Abby started a new life with her partner, Tam Chuk Kwan, with whom she also had 2 children. Despite the divorce, Abby continued to financially support Alex Kwong's family. She even let them live in one of her luxury apartments and helped her ex-brother-in-law, Anthony, with money and business. On February 21st, 2023, Abby suddenly went missing. She was supposed to pick up her daughter from school, but never showed up. Her disappearance immediately caught attention, and police began searching for her. Investigators learned that on the day she went missing, Abby's former brother-in-law, Anthony, who also worked as her driver, was meant to take her to pick up the child. But when the police questioned Anthony and his parents, the information they gave was misleading, which slowed down the search. 3 days later, on February 24th, police made a horrifying discovery. In a rented house in the Tai Po district, they found parts of Abby's body. Her legs were inside a refrigerator, while her head and other body parts were missing at the time. The house had been prepared as a site to take apart and hide her remains. Plastic sheets covered the walls, and investigators found a meat grinder, an electric saw, and large pots containing human tissue, vegetables, and soup. Police also found her skull, ribs, and hair in one of the pots. Forensic experts confirmed that she died from a heavy blow to the back of her head. The crime scene shocked everyone. It was brutal and planned in detail. Soon, suspicion fell on Abby's former in-laws. Police arrested her ex-brother-in-law Anthony, her ex-father-in-law, and her ex-mother-in-law. Abby's ex-husband, Alex Kwong, was caught later while trying to flee by speedboat. When he was arrested, he had luxury watches and a large amount of cash with him. The main motive is believed to be money and property. Abby owned expensive real estate and had been planning to sell one luxury apartment, worth around 70 million Hong Kong dollars, that was registered under her ex-father-in-law's name. This made the Kwong family angry, and it is believed they planned her murder because of it. A woman named Min, who was the mistress of Abby's ex-father-in-law, was also arrested. She was accused of helping hide Alex Kwong by renting him a luxury flat. Her current partner promised to take care of her 4 children and described her as a kind and loving person. Friends remembered her as someone generous who always wanted to help others. Right now, the suspects, including her ex-husband and his family, are facing murder charges. If they are found guilty, they could spend the rest of their lives in prison. The trial will bring out more details in time. May she rest in peace.